everyone. We really hope you enjoyed this episode. So, if you're watching on YouTube, if you could please like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, or if you're listening on Spotify, you can always follow us there. Every like and share and subscribe can help our channel to be seen by many more Stargate fans. So, we really appreciate it. And then we also have all of our socials listed up on the screen right now if you wish to follow us there. Okay, thank you, and I hope you enjoy. Bye. And to all the Stargate fans out there, we would love to hear from you and chat with you on our show. So if you're interested in doing that, please reach out to us via any of our social media platforms or email.
So last time, in the last two episodes, we covered a couple interesting things, and specifically, 2 episodes ago, we talked about retconning and kind of revising timelines, and of course, this was done with some characters in Stargate, not necessarily completely rewriting timelines, but using devices to bring people back or change things that happened. And one of those was the return of Dr. Beckett. And so I know we also talked about last season we did an episode on Dr. Beckett and our feelings about Dr. Beckett, and I think we did say, oh, we should revisit this, later on because his character does undergo some transformations. So I thought it would be really cool to talk about that today. And as always, before we start the episode proper and get into our feelings about cloned Beckett, anyone that has any art or any fandom materials or anything else that you would like to highlight here or have us show, please contact us. Our socials are in the description. And yeah, we like to get to know other people's work and how they engage with the fandom and community.
Yes.
So maybe we can start. I don't know, like just by talking. I thought maybe just we could start by talking about our feelings about the return of Beckett. Maybe just our initial reaction when they revealed him.
Yeah. Should I go first?
Yeah, sure, sure, sure.
Um, yeah, my initial reaction of cloned Beckett was that while it was nice to see him again, I wasn't too thrilled about it, to be honest. I think because of the nature in which he left the show was so like traumatic and I was so sad that then like having him just like reappear, and I honestly didn't expect it. Like I had forgotten because I've only watched Atlantis once before. And so and my initial response when I saw him was I was really confused because I knew he was dead. And then you find out he's a clone. And then I don't know. I just didn't really know how to feel. Like I would have expected myself to be super happy about it, but I just didn't know how to feel was my initial reaction. How about you?
Yeah. I mean, no, that's a really good reaction. I think for me, I was just like really at the time super excited because I kind of I'm thinking the first time I watched it through. The second time, like when I'm watching it through now, I kind of I mean, I can describe maybe both. So the first time I was really like, oh my gosh, Beckett, what the heck? Like, how is he here? Why is he here? And what's going on? And I was so, at the time, it was not so far removed from when I saw the episode where he passed because I was watching it over the summer in a kind of a quick manner. So it was a little bit in time, like temporal, like my reality, they were very close together. So at that point, I had kind of been like watching it in a row, and then suddenly Beckett shows up again. And I remember thinking, ah, he's one of my favorite characters. I'm glad to see him on the show again. So that was my initial reaction to him sort of showing up. But I didn't really know, like, until they found out you find out he's a clone. I didn't really know how he was integrated or at what point was he cloned. And so there were some feelings about that, but we can get to that later. The second time that I saw it and when it happened, I mean, maybe this will kind of some of this will be brought to light more as we talk about our feelings about the bringing back the character in general and how they were brought back. I wasn't quite as like super gung-ho and excited about it the second time around. But the first time I
Yeah.
was just really excited, but I guess I didn't know what his storyline was going to be. I didn't know anything, and so it was very exciting. With the second time I knew it was going to happen, so it didn't really um surprise me as much. I forgot
Yeah.
the manner in which it happened. And so I thought, oh yeah, that's right. This reveal was actually really kind of cool. It took you off guard. It was really exciting. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, I'm not sure how I feel about the storyline itself, and maybe that's something we can talk about.
Yeah. And I mean too, like also like I guess we should mention that we're only talking about this up to a certain point because we haven't reached certain episodes where they also kind of continue with this
Hmm.
character, I believe. So but yeah, I mean, I honestly didn't remember he came back at
Oh,
all.
really?
Like I didn't remember any of that. Like I mean, like I've always joked and just honestly truly mean it. I am horrible with remembering things that happen in
I
shows.
mean, me too.
I'm horrible. And like it, I mean, granted it was a while ago when I had initially watched Stargate Atlantis. And I just think at that time when I watched it initially, um I was just focused, I think, on other characters too, that I think maybe that just never stayed in my mind that that ever even happened. So it's like for me, seeing this his character reintroduced into the episode as a clone, I didn't expect it at all. Um, I figured, I mean, they kind of have it lasting longer than I anticipated, like with having the clone around, to be honest. Like I thought like after he was introduced, he'd be gone. Like it was just like a little like thing for the episode. So yeah, it's just weird because like it's kind of a strange thing for me personally because I absolutely love that character. I love Beckett, like, and I was so sad to see him go, that you would think I would be so excited to see that he's came back in some sort of capacity, right? Like even if it's not actually him, it's the clone that basically feels like it's him. Um and so I can see why they did it. I can
Hmm.
see how that can pull in the viewers and those of us that really like Beckett, like you're like, yes, Beckett's back, you know? But something about it just feels off to me, like and the whole cloning thing. But yeah, yeah, sorry, I don't know if you had other things to say about that, but
No, I agree with you, and I think the biggest thing that hurts me, like it, and this is really, it's so super ridiculous because it's a fictitious character. I do not know why this is such a like a that disastrous thing in my mind. But what is so tragic, the most tragic thing to me about Beckett dying was not necessarily that we didn't get to watch him anymore. It was that he never got to freaking go on his fishing trip, and nobody went fishing with him. And he passed away thinking none of his friends wanted to go fishing with him. And he never got to do the thing he really wanted on the day that he was off, even though he was constantly serving everyone else. And
yeah,
so here he is, like, and I mean, in a way, this is like brilliant writing because I feel this strongly and sadly about this character, that it just tortures me that this poor guy didn't get to go on his fishing trip because none of his friends were willing to or wanted to or could, and they all had different things. And a
yeah,
lot of people got to do the thing they wanted to do on their day off, except for Beckett, and he was the one that was killed, which is like,
yeah,
and then the clone comes back, but the clone never experienced this. So still, that Beckett in that reality never got to go on that fishing trip. And so it's still like, I mean,
yeah,
there's this new Beckett, okay, it's really cool, but it's like a Beckett like backed up, and that other Beckett, the actual Beckett, still never got to go on that fishing trip.
right,
So the part
right.
that really hurt me, like, was never resolved.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think no, that makes sense to me. I would be curious to see if that also bothers other people as well, because that does bother me too, like thinking of that. Like it's really sad. And I think too, maybe the reason why I'm more resistant, resistant, resistance, is that the right word? I don't know. I'm more against having the clone come back is because I feel like the way the episode ended with Beckett after he passes away, and they have that whole scene where it's like you're kind of like seeing, was it McKay or someone talking with him? Like it's supposed to be
Yes.
them. It was kind of like this really sweet, like touching moment of it's supposed to be like him talking to him after that he has passed away. And so like that scene was so like impactful, I think, and so
Yes.
like sad, but yet touching. And there was so much with even just that one scene that really like struck something within me as I was watching it, that I feel like then having a clone appear, it just feels like it kind of makes light of that and takes that away. And I know that that's not the intention, and maybe no one else sees it as that. But for some reason, I think that's why I'm partially just like, well, wait, what? Like, oh, he's back? Like, oh, he's a clone that thinks like he's been captured this whole time, and like he's been forced to work on like a the Hoffen drug and like
Mhm.
perfect that. And this whole time he's been thinking he's Carson Beckett, and he's been trapped, and he's just has all this faith that he will get rescued, you know? And it's just kind of like that is just something about like the dual nature of it all messes with my head that I don't like it.
Yeah. It's interesting that you brought up that point about McKay and that scene too.
Yeah.
That is so because I hadn't really thought about it. Like that you said that this is kind of this duality and that it almost makes light of that because I didn't really ever think about that.
Yeah.
But that scene, it's extremely powerful. And not only is it powerful for us, but it's also extremely powerful for McKay. And I
Mm-hmm.
feel like after that, like McKay kind of has a little bit of, like how when something like that happens, I mean, I think McKay felt a little bit not responsible, but he felt like a crappy friend. I
Yeah.
think it kind of starts making you feel a little bit like you reevaluate things. And I did notice that after that, I think he started to treat his some of his relationships and things a little bit more seriously. And
Yeah.
so, I mean, maybe it kind of had an impact on that character. And then, like as you said, well, then when he comes back, I mean, what is the impact? I mean, I guess it's the same, like in a sense, like McKay still lost Beckett
Yeah.
because Beckett is still, I mean, and he did still. So I think it's still. I mean, if you think about it, there could have been a scenario in which Beckett was there and Beckett clone was there. They're not kind of mutually
Yeah.
exclusive. And so, no, I completely agree with you there. And yeah, I guess I didn't think about this, but yeah, how was Beckett handling this being captured the whole, like, because it was a long time, right? Like it must have been
Yeah.
a year or something.
I think it was supposed to be years, because it was basically I think the clone thought that they were taken after they were on that planet, right? That
Yeah, him and McKay were captured when they were betrayed by the Beleriand Sepharis and were taken to a hive ship. So it was him and McKay that were captured, I guess. And because
oh, maybe I'm thinking of it happening in a different scene. Like, remember there was like the thing where like they had put all of the Wraith onto a planet.
yes, that's what, no, I think that's what you're thinking of
Oh,
because
okay.
it says back in 2006, the real Carson Beckett was looking after the 200 Wraith that turned human and is very interesting, including Michael, so he could teach them how to administer the drug. And then
Mhm.
a faction of them learned, and then Michael held Carson prisoner, and he was later released. But at that point, Michael took some cells from him. And
Yeah.
what's really interesting about this, because I mean, this is when I guess like so Beckett would be coming from this point in his life is when I was watching this the second time through. I remembered that Beckett died, but I didn't remember how. Like I didn't remember
Hmm.
that. And so actually when this episode happened, like when he was kind of on the planet, like I think at some point he's even alone. I
Yeah.
truly think that when I was watching this, I truly thought that is where Beckett died. And that's actually
Ah,
not where he died. He died much later. But it's
yeah.
funny that that's where his clone begins life. So weird
Yeah.
that it's so
Oh,
weird
that is interesting.
because
Yeah.
I truly, when I was watching it, I knew Beckett was killed at some point. I didn't remember how, um, but I remembered that that happened and that it was some point I think in like season three. This was kind of earlier, I think, in season three, and so
Yeah.
yeah. But I was very shocked when then like he wasn't, and he kept go like it was through the almost the entire season, and so it's funny that that's when actually the clone is sort of born in a way.
Yeah. Yeah. Um and and yeah, and I mean, I guess too, like story wise, it's like I also felt a little strange about like the dynamics between clone Beckett and the rest of the team, because it's like they all reacted how you would expect, right? So initially, like they're just really shocked and confused and don't know what to think, as to like some of them are kind of obviously happy to see Carson back, because he obviously had died. And it's just like it felt strange to me though, because I feel like then it had to quickly shift.
Mhm.
Like it had to quickly shift with their dynamic, with kind of grasping like they're seeing a friend of theirs that died. And then I can't fully remember everything, but I remember once they brought Beckett back to Atlantis, like I think he started having issues, right? Like he started having like health issues or something
Mhm.
due to being a clone and not receiving like the special treatment or something that Michael would give him, so that he didn't start to deteriorate or something like that. And
Yes.
like I think then when that happened, then it's like you see everything like shifting, and like all the different like team members like having to come to terms with it all. But it felt kind of like quickly done, like in the sense of like how
Totally.
they had to accept him as him and as his clone. And that's where they also find out he's a clone, is because of, what is it, Dr. Keller researching that and finding out that he's a clone.
Mhm.
And so I don't know, it's like I guess to me it just felt like the whole thing felt kind of strange, and I can't fully pinpoint it, but it's like the vibe of it all just felt a little off to me. um yeah, hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's really weird when you think about it because if you imagine like knowing someone and like let's say close friend and colleague, or I mean anybody really, and they pass and you go through the process of grieving them because at this point he's been gone for a very long time.
Yeah,
And then you run into someone that is basically identical to them but isn't actually them. I mean, it's very different. Like, I mean, and this is something we can talk about how this compares to the other things like Ascension. I mean, when they ran into Daniel, when he was ascended and then came back down, it was actually Daniel. So it wasn't like they ran into
yeah,
another Daniel that was kind of created or something. And it was actually Daniel who had ascended and then came back down. So I mean, yeah, on the one hand, it must be really jarring because you have this, you already grieve the person and then suddenly they're back. But in this case, it must be even weirder, like, and more jarring because you've grieved the person, they're back, but they're not really that person.
yeah,
So it's like, in a way, you get the, it's like, okay, well, you can interact with them. They have a lot of like the same memories and, but not everything. And so
yeah,
I can imagine that would, and I mean, I guess in a way, like, I mean, maybe this is the intent that it's like, you're happy about it, but like not happy enough. Like it's there's something kind of missing or wrong. And maybe that was the intention when they kind of brought
yeah,
the character back that, they don't want to have like a happy thing like with the, ascended being like, Daniel ascending and then coming back. It's actually a really happy conclusion to
yeah,
him like being gone. And then actually that it added some things to the storyline that they could do. I mean, in this case it did too, and we can talk about that as well. Um,
yeah,
but I think that there's like something about it that it almost like it makes you uncomfortable or makes you not quite
yeah.
fully.
And maybe that's like the geniusness behind the
Yeah.
writing, because maybe like they're wanting you to feel that way,
Hmm.
like because that's how, you know maybe they felt towards seeing him, is like they don't know how to feel, and they feel uncomfortable, and they're happy but yet they're not happy because it's not actually him. And then for the poor clone, like they really have different memories, in terms of, clearly they didn't die and they were held captive, and there's certain memories there that are unique to them. And so eh, you know
Yep.
it's so strange to kind of fully like think about. I do remember when, with like um the ascension of like, when like Daniel Jackson came
Hmm.
back. If I remember correctly, we had done an episode like in our first season or something, where we were talking about that.
Hmm.
And I think, if I remember correctly, we had both kind of agreed like that sometimes like there was like weird aspects of that too. Like I don't think it's the same weird aspects as like this clone thing with Beckett, but I think, if I remember correctly, they had Daniel Jackson like be like he everything had been wiped from his memory, right? Um, and slowly things of his own personality were coming back.
Mm.
And it was really only like an episode or two where they had him kind of act a little bit different. And then all of a sudden, boom, he was back to being like the typical Daniel Jackson. And I remember I always felt that was kind of strange in a sense because it didn't really make sense why it happened so quickly. I mean, I think in terms of viewing it, it makes sense because you don't want to have that last maybe too long with him kind of not fully remembering certain things. But I can kind of compare it to the clone
Yep.
thing in the sense that with Daniel Jackson, coming back, not fully being Daniel Jackson and kind of, yes, it's him, it's not a clone, but he's different at first because things have been taken away from his memory. And then you have the clone Beckett, where it's like, it's a clone, so it's not the real person, but yet things have been altered with their memory to think, because they were created to be that person, but they're not. So it's like I can see like the similarities there, but certainly with the clone Beckett, I definitely feel like there's more of me not wanting to have that there as opposed to having Daniel Jackson back. I didn't feel that way. Um, Although then when Daniel Jackson came back, then Jonas left. So I didn't like that, but that's a different thing. Um,
Yeah. I kind of wonder because, okay, I think we're looking at, I think in the case of Daniel Jackson, we're looking at season 7 of Stargate. So this would have been what, like 2003 or four, something like that. And for the Atlantis, we're looking at season 5. So it probably would have been around like 2007 or 8, something around there.
I'm not sure.
But all of this, I mean, all of it is really prior to like the big era of where, like Netflix binge show, where people would really watch show in order. It was still in the era of weekly episode. So I almost kind
Yeah.
of wonder, like, to us probably watching it, like the way you would expect a show to unfold now, they would probably spend a lot more time where, um, like, yeah, like Daniel or Beckett, like their memory was different or something, because I think there's a different way you experience that time. But maybe back then they didn't do that. I think there was just some things where like continuity things were dropped earlier because there was already a week between and then another, and so they kind of, it was a little bit more. I think at this point it was starting to be like shows, I do notice they start to be thought of more as like overarching things rather than episodic. And you can definitely see
Ah,
that in the beginning of Stargate, that everything, it's very episodic, but I still think it's somewhat pretty episodic in that regard. And so I almost kind of wonder, that's probably why with Daniel, like, it's maybe brought up once or twice, and then after that it's over, because by that time you're like 3 weeks into the season, and so it's a little bit different.
yeah.
So I think,
That's a really good point to bring up. Yeah.
I mean, I think it's just, it's very interesting always. Like I find this, I mean, and I find this is something maybe we'll talk about as we get into Atlantis and then even more in universe. Um, because I haven't seen Universe, but based on what a lot of people say about it, I kind of suspect that a lot of some of the like problems people have with Universe has actually nothing to do really with the show itself, and it's just kind of how TV consumption and everything changed around then, that a lot of shows changed. And I think in Atlanta specifically, and I mean, I don't know if you, I mean, and I do find this is also very related to this clone storyline. I find that in the last two seasons, um, things tend to get ramped up a little bit more and a little bit faster, like in terms of the intensity, the things that are going on, the darkness, the seriousness. And in SG1 it took a very long time, because I think,
Yeah.
but I think at this point, like in TV, there's things like 24, there's all these shows that are happening where every season things crazier and crazier. And so I think in that sense you can feel that a little bit in Atlantis.
Yeah, that's such a good point to bring up because I actually have been watching a show called The Ark.
Mhm,
And The Ark, I think, has the same one of the writers, I think, of Stargate.
mhm.
And there's so many little like winks to Stargate in it that I've been catching. But that show, first off, is so good. So I definitely recommend people should watch that show. But also it's intense. Like it's boom, 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 boom. Each episode, like something is happening. Like it's like quite fast paced compared to if I think about how SG1 or Atlantis go.
Yeah.
And I can see what you mean, like, and it isn't like I necessarily even thought about it. Like I didn't really notice, but now that you're talking about it, I'm thinking back and I'm just like, oh, yeah, like SG1 moved quite slowly. Like, and then like, in fact, I think if I remember correctly, when we talked to uh one of your daughters, Freya, I think it was, it said this, that she had mentioned that that's why she liked Stargate when we did the episode where we had like younger people
Mhm.
watching Stargate. And I think that was one of the things that she noticed about it, is that she really liked how it moved kind of slowly compared to now. So yeah, yeah, the pacing is certainly different and how they move those storylines. So um yeah, and then when you think about the year that those episodes came out, that does make sense why it gives off a certain vibe that sometimes now watching it back can like maybe confuse the viewer a little bit or make you wonder why certain things did or didn't happen. So um
Yeah, it's interesting.
yeah,
But
yeah,
I also, I mean, I think, and maybe we can, as we start like kind of talking about like this whole integration of the clone storyline, I think the clone storyline in itself is also another one of these things where it's really, ramping it up in terms of the the amount of like crazy things that are going on, like, and for the shock value, like that Beckett just appears as this kind of out of nowhere, and the sort of storyline behind it and what connects all that, because very similar to Daniel, um he came back. I mean, I think it's maybe a little bit different because Daniel coming back as ascended, I guess in a way it was linked because at that time they were dealing with a Goa'uld that was kind of half ascended, and so it was a really nice bridge that they could use. Daniel was ascended, he had some of his memories, and they could use this, so it did kind of push the storyline forward. But I think Beckett's even a little bit more pivotal because, as we know, the clone was created to help Michael with his research, and Michael and his research is kind of one of the main antagonists in this last sort of like the last season and a half. I mean, he's kind of been around, but he kind
yeah,
of really pushes into the foreground of being an antagonist this point of the story. And I think it's interesting because the clone kind of works really closely into his storyline, and also it kind of like, I mean, I thought it was an interesting integration in that regard. Like it's very,
yeah,
I guess you could say it's very similar. That then the cloning, it's very related to the storyline, but there's also quite a lot of differences, and
yeah,
so yeah.
yeah,
And I mean,
yeah.
maybe we
Sorry, go ahead.
so I was thinking like, yeah, maybe we can kind of relate how Beckett is there in relation to sort of the storyline of Michael and what he's doing. And um I mean, how something I think you brought up that I found really interesting is this: what was Beckett thinking and doing while he was captured? And that he
Yeah.
was still doing the research, and like he had no choice. But and then you kind of like, at least I also kind of question, like, I mean, realistically, is that also how Beckett would be? Would he do that? Do you really think like the real Beckett, like this is, I mean, obviously he maybe had no choice. But yeah, I mean, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, when I was refreshing my memory of all of this, one of the things that I read was that it mentions that uh Mike that the clone Beckett refused to do the research or whatever it is that he was doing with the that Hoffen drug, and Michael brought in some female that he killed in front of him
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
and
Okay.
says that he was going to bring in a person each day and kill them right in front of him if he
Oh
didn't
my
do
God.
anything.
That's right. That's right.
And
Yeah.
so I think initially he did act how the regular Beckett would act, where he's refusing.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
and I think he would probably let himself get killed and not do
Totally.
anything. But I think because that use of his empathy and the trauma that you experience to have some crazy person killing people right in front of you,
Yeah, no
um
kidding.
after that happened once, he's like, nope, okay, I'm gonna do it, kind of attitude, because he didn't want to see anyone else get killed. So in that sense, it does seem like something to me that like the real Beckett would do. um but I kind of feel like potentially the real Beckett would maybe try and still figure out a way to get away from it somehow. Like maybe change something with the drug to then use it against Michael to then try and get out or something. Like I feel like they kind of just played the whole card of like, oh, I knew you guys would come and save me. I knew, like, I always had hope kind of attitude. Like I knew like you would find me, was a little like not realistic in my mind. Like, while I feel like he would initially be hopeful, once you're there for years, that breaks you down mentally. And I feel like he probably wouldn't have given up trying to figure out a way to get out himself.
That's true. Yeah. I think that that's the part that I think was a bit the most complicated for me is, I mean, yeah, you're right. Like he would do what he's said, if other people's lives are on the line. And maybe even he wouldn't try and escape if he thought that other people would get killed if he escaped.
Mm.
But I think I agree with you 100% that I think Beckett is so smart and he's so strategic about things. And we've seen how he is even on his own because we've watched him on his own on this planet with all these other, with all the hybrids. Um, or I guess those were the ones that they injected and they kind of became human and then kind of reverted back. And um,
Yeah.
when he was on the planet with all of them, we saw how he dealt with things on his own a little bit because at some point he was there alone. Um, and it's it's interesting because I truly think I agree with you that I truly think he would have probably really tried hard to try to develop something that either destabilized something in someone or did something so that he could personally get out without other people being harmed. And whether
Yeah.
or not that was successful is another story.
Yeah.
But I mean, that could have just been something like it could have even been something he started working on, and then they could work on it more
Yeah.
once he was out. But I think that the fact that the only thing he said was kind of waiting. This is also interesting because I guess that Beckett had the last memory that he was just taken, and so most of the time Beckett was actually. I mean, they would rescue each other, and but I mean,
Yeah.
I also can't imagine. It's also hard, like you said, it's really hard to imagine him just sitting there waiting to be rescued. I think
Yeah.
he would be much more proactive, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. I think so. And also, if you, I'm not sure if you remember, but when Michael's character was introduced into Stargate Atlantis, um, the whole reason that Michael came to be was because they had a drug in the process of making him become human. I'm not sure if it was the same drug, but um, that was initially all created by Beckett, right?
Yes,
So
it was that the drug to kind of isolate the Arades DNA so that you could kind
yeah,
of turn a wraith back into a human.
yeah. So it was all created by him
Mhm.
initially, and I know that when Michael's character was introduced into this show, there was a lot of like mind games too with his character in terms of like feeling so bad for him as to how you realize certain decisions, while it was well intended, um has kind of made Michael the way he is.
Yes.
And I think if I remember correctly, Beckett always regretted
Yep.
like even coming up with it in the first place. And so it's kind of like an interesting thought that like out of all of the ones to kind of have this happen to, Michael has it happen to Beckett almost in a sense too, as a way of like, yes, he's the one that can help figure out the drug. And that's probably why he like cloned him. But like at the same time, it's also like a big F you to the
Yeah.
person that created it, because
That's
they
such a good
they
point.
basically created him, basically,
Mhm.
and has made it now that Michael can't be accepted by humans or by Wraith, and it's kind of made him to be this very um vindictive person or whatever he is, Wraith, human, whatever. um Now that, like, yeah, I just find that interesting.
That is no, that's
Yeah.
really interesting. And I mean, I have to say, like, it's something I think that happens in Stargate is there's sometimes these episodes that really make you question the side, like and see that good guys aren't always perfect. And I think the one that really made you look at yourself in SG1, like one of the first ones, is the Knox. Because
Hmm.
they have this sort of different view, and it kind of questions like the not the legitimacy, but the way of SG-1. And I think obviously the answer is not that SG-1 is always wrong or that it's wrong to fight, because obviously there are definitely situations worth fighting for and times to be neutral and times to be not, but it does kind of make you think about it. And I really, really
Yeah.
appreciate that you just start having to thought, well, are they as bad as the gold, or are they maybe going about it in a different way, or maybe it's just this kind of thing to take home. Not all, your way isn't the only way. And
Yeah.
I think that there's something in the Michael episode, like where he's first, they bring him in first. I think this is really, it kind of shows an imperfection, a similar imperfection in Atlantis. I mean, and I think that
Yeah.
they don't always, like, obviously they're not always showing them perfect. They're always making mistakes, but this is kind of one of those mistakes where it's like, this isn't just you chose the wrong thing to do and you could have chosen both and it just turned out to be the wrong one, or maybe you were a little bit like wrongly informed, or you did a stupid, everybody does stupid things, like everybody makes
Yeah.
mistakes, everybody, and you own up to it. But this was kind of a thing where there's really this weird ethical and moral line and how to cross it, and it really, like, by the end you almost felt like, is this really the ethically and morally right thing that they did here? And I think
Yeah.
they kind of think it's not, and I know Beckett thinks it's not, and I think in that sense I appreciate that a little bit. And I think what you
Yeah.
said, that it's interesting they brought Beckett back in this particular role,
Yeah.
especially because he was the one that was most, I think, like, repentant about it. And
Yeah.
so I think that's very interesting. And yeah, maybe that also kind of makes it a little bit even sadder, because this character, like, first character, like, dies because he can't go fishing, and then the clone, it's brought back, having to work for in a situation where he feels like so bad already. But maybe
Yeah.
that particular aspect would also add to, maybe this kind of changes how, now a little bit, how I see him continuing to work for Michael, because maybe he also had that layer of guilt that he wanted
Ah,
he wanted to make things better. And so,
yeah.
just a thought.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. Very well, that does make total sense that like he could be like working off of that layer of guilt. That makes total sense. Yeah, it's interesting. And I think too, like then with the clone, what then happens? I remember like they had to put him in that stasis pod, was it? In order to figure out something to help him, to try and help him live. Um, then eventually they do find that. And then I think kind of where we're at currently, because of where we're at in season 5, we've just seen up to the point where he then goes back to Earth, right?
Yes, exactly.
Um, and I can't remember with that as well. Do they ever tell his mom? Like,
But he's a clone.
yeah,
I don't know. That's a really good question, right? Like, I mean,
because that just would really mess with someone. Like there was
yes,
a whole funeral and everything, and then because I remember the clone immediately wanting to go talk to their mom and have her be told that he was there. But then I don't think they did. But then when he went back to Earth, they must have, because you can't just go around, you know, looking just like someone's son and being referred to that person and not tell her. So I can't remember like what happens there, like what they tell her, or if they tell her, if he's kept somewhere else. I don't know.
that's a very good question. That's a really good. I actually don't remember either, and I haven't
Yeah.
seen that far, so I don't know. I don't know if it's mentioned. Maybe it's never mentioned.
Oh,
No,
maybe.
maybe somebody can tell us in the comments, or I mean, I guess we'll find out as we watch. But
Yeah.
it's an interesting thought. Like, and
Yeah.
yeah, what would you tell the family? Like, yeah, by the way, I know you already. I mean, because that must. I mean, for someone, it's probably hard enough for people in Atlantis, like, but they've been dealing with this kind of things already, like in their life.
Yeah.
They have a little bit more of a framework to work with for,
Yeah.
but can you imagine like being, having almost like no clue what is going on? Like you don't even maybe even know that cloning is a thing you
Yeah.
can do. And then you find out, oh yeah, actually, your son that passed, now he's a clone.
Yeah.
That would,
Yeah. Because what did they tell her too? Like when he did pass, because she wouldn't have known that he was in Atlantis. She wouldn't have known his job that he was doing there. So I think they also had to make up like something that sounded more earthly, right?
Probably.
That actually happened. So how do you explain that away? Like,
Yeah.
it's almost would be better if she knew of the Stargate program and of all of that, because then it would make sense. But like, then they could tell her. So they probably didn't tell her because I don't think she even knows that he was like in Atlantis. Like, I think they had to say a whole other fake story of how he died and where he was.
Yeah. I mean, which also on the other hand though, like maybe I'm completely remembering this wrong. But in season 7, when in the episode where Dr. Fraser dies, isn't that documentary when they're watching it with General Hammond? Like, doesn't he say something like, it's really hard what you can tell the families like when people pass away, but this is something we can give that like this sort of documentary thing that's something they could give them or something. So I don't know if maybe when they die, there's actually they can know, or if there's some elements that are declassified or not. I have no idea.
Yeah. I think there's probably some sort of like elements that they can tell them. And
Yeah,
especially in Dr. Fraser's sense, like maybe her family knew she was working within the military.
yeah.
So I think they can have that aspect to it. Um,
But I mean,
but
like
yeah, that
the
is
doc, because
confusing.
the documentary did show like Stargate stuff, and I remember like him saying, "Oh, it's a shame no one's ever going to see it." And then didn't isn't that where they said something like, like this is some like, when you never really know what to tell people when they, their loved ones pass, this is something we can give them. And I don't know if maybe I'm completely misremembering that, but I swore that they almost said that this could be something used to share with people that passed, that they could show them the documentary. But I don't know, maybe I'm totally wrong.
Maybe, or maybe they just mean they can explain up to a point what happened because it's in a documentary form they were able to see fully. But I mean, I don't know. Like that is confusing actually because they're so like big on wanting to have things secretive from the general public
Yeah.
that yeah, that wouldn't fully make sense. But I mean, maybe. Yeah, I don't really remember. Um But
But yeah,
yeah, that
anyways.
is interesting both in that case and then also in the case of the clone. It would be interesting if someone knows if Carson's mom was ever told,
Yes,
like,
exactly.
or what they told her, because I don't remember. But again, we still haven't seen certain parts of what continues on with that clone. Um, so
So yeah, I
maybe
mean,
that will answer it.
somebody could just say like, yeah, it's answered. I mean,
Yeah, so that they don't
your
give it
question
away.
is a spoiler. That's a way, because then we know that it's not left dangling. I mean, maybe it's left dangling and we never know. I don't know.
Yeah,
It's one of those things. But yeah, that's very, I mean, it is interesting. Like those things I never thought about. Like when I thought about the like it's something that just didn't occur to me. Like, oh yeah, that's right.
yeah.
I mean,
Yeah. So overall, like after us talking about that, I mean, we've kind of already answered this, but after us talking about it all, then would you say you would have chosen for him to come back as a clone or not?
I would say no. Like to be honest, and complete honesty, like if I'm just like, okay, I agree. I think that for I am not the writer, and the writers are like way better than me at creating this. And part of the things that probably are the reasons why I would say I don't want to bring it back are exactly the reasons that probably it should have been brought back like this, because you should never really be like so fully satisfied with everything. That's why these things are interesting. But I think truly, if he were brought back, I would have preferred it being something where his he continued his consciousness. Like
Hmm.
I think if it was something where he was ascended and came back, or like he before he died he like downloaded his consciousness somewhere and they like uploaded it somewhere, but it was like right before, and so he's still kind of, but that's more because I have such a like sadness about the fact that he never got to go fishing. And so
Yeah.
like I kind of want that to be resolved, but I think that's also part of why maybe this is the perfect way to have brought him back, because I'm
Yeah.
so unsettled about it.
Yeah. I know.
What
It's like
about you?
yeah, it's like exactly. I feel like I find like thinking one answer and then I talk myself out of that answer because then I think, well, maybe that's exactly what they wanted. Maybe that's why it's a good idea. So it's like my initial reaction is no, I would not want to bring him back as a clone, because I feel like the episode where he died was so final. It was done in such a way that was so done and sad, but perfectly sad and perfectly done, that it was such a strong episode. I feel it's strange to then just bring him back. I feel like then it just makes that not matter anymore, um, even though it was a clone. If he did come back in an ascended way or whatever, even then, I don't know how I would feel about that because of the previous episode being so final. I
Yes.
think if the episode was done in a way that you were left with questions, and
Yeah.
while it seemed somewhat final, there was some sort of element of being unsure that that's actually what happened, then I think my mind would be open to him coming back in some
True.
sort of way. But that being said, if this actually happened, it would have been more of a final moment. And then it would have been a like, oh, wow, you're here again moment.
Yeah.
So it would be confusing and we would feel how we're feeling. So, in that sense, it's almost genius.
Yeah, exactly,
Because you're
right?
just like, dang, you put us through that whole like emotional roller coaster, like as if we're there. So, in that sense, it's pure genius. But like, I think just like if I had to choose just as what I would have preferred, I think um I wouldn't have had him come back as a clone. I would have sadly just been sad about the fact that character was no longer and kind of keep it as that. Um, Maybe have someone come on that somehow related to him or something, but then again, you can't have the same actor. I guess you could have had it be like a twin, a long lost twin
Long
that came
lost twin
back,
Beckett.
or something, and maybe that would feel different than a clone. But
You know
yeah.
what? You know what could have been? Because I just thought of this. What if instead, when Beckett was brought back from that planet, it was actually a cloned Beckett brought back, and he was the one that was killed, and then he found the real Beckett.
Oh,
That's a scenario where I could see where it would actually work.
oh
And it would be
wow,
satisfying, but again,
yeah.
maybe that's too satisfying. But that it could have been, they could have reintroduced it that way. That it was actually the real Beckett that was there and had been captured, and it was the clone that was killed.
Yes. See, I would have, yeah, I think I would have been more open to that. Yeah, that's a good idea. Oh my gosh. Okay, so is it our silly question time? What's our silly question? I just kind of
Yeah.
briefly looked over this.
Well, I mean, I thought of it's kind of like a silly one, but I mean, one of the ones I thought of was kind of serious and probably pretty obvious. But I mean, I thought each of us could kind of like, we could describe like maybe one or two, if we have more than that, like scenarios that we would have been interesting to explore that involved like cloning in
Mhm.
Stargate.
Yeah.
And so I just came up, there were two that I thought of that I think would have been
Okay.
like, one is I think every character except I mean, I don't think Vala was explored as much in terms of the like having so much with alternate realities and things and other versions of her other than in the episode with Ball.
Mhm.
Um, and because there was such a connection with like Ball and cloning, I think it would have been really hilarious to have some kind of episode where there were a bunch of Vala clones or like duplicates of Vala because she's so conniving. Like, you know, like in some of the episodes where there's two Carters, it was always like, oh my gosh, so much like, you know, crazy scientific intelligence in the same room. Like, and it was like almost overwhelming in a humorous way. Like, I think
Yeah.
it would be really cool to do that with Vala, especially when Vala's like at the peak of being, you know, like the sort of pirate type that's like conniving. And I mean, it would be such a screwing with your head episode. Like, I think there were so many directions you could take with that, and it would be so funny and confusing and humorous. And
Oh my gosh,
it
yeah.
would have been like perfect maybe around the time of all the Ball clones because, you know, like I could just, to me that would be really, it would be both funny and also could be somewhat serious at the same time.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I think that'd be amazing. I think that's like a perfect idea. Like I wasn't realizing that we were also thinking of SG-1. I was just thinking of Atlantis when I was looking at that question, but that would be perfect. I would love an episode like that. Like that'd be so cool. I kind of thought of one that was kind of fits a similar kind of mindset, but for Atlantis, I thought it'd be really, really funny to have like a bunch of McKay clones and like just have it that like they're all just like, you know how McKay gets. And so it's like I can just imagine them all like in a room trying to figure out stuff, like 20 of them in there, just like, bickering it out and just being like annoyed with each other, but then all thinking they're the greatest, and which one is the greatest McKay? Like and just like have it be like a really humorous thing where it's like somehow like he's by accident cloned a bunch and they have to just keep them all in one room because they're driving everyone crazy, and like yeah, I could just find that really like hilarious at being McKay. um
That would be really funny, actually. And I mean, it would be super like imagine like some of them they get even more and more anxious and they
yeah,
and like he, like you imagine like he tries to fix it, but instead he makes another clone and then so you get more and more McKays and eventually it's just like I mean that would be hilarious. That would be awesome.
yeah, yeah. Well, what was the other one that you thought of?
It's actually really like it's kind of like ridiculous and serious, but my scenario was that the Asgard actually were able to clone themselves properly and didn't deteriorate, and so they didn't actually disappear.
Oh, that would be great. Yeah, that's a good one. That's a really good one. Yeah, I like both of the things that you thought of because I wouldn't have thought of either one of those things. And I think like both would be awesome and work really nicely, I think, within like the storyline too. I didn't really think of another one, to be honest, with the clone. I just kind of like quickly thought up one and I just thought of McKay, a bunch of McKays. So that's
It
the
would
only one
be
that came
funny.
to my mind. But yeah, I like that idea with the Asgard.
Well,
That would,
imagine Asgard and Atlantis. Like it,
yes, yeah,
like if you had like even if it's like, and I guess in that sense you could have some Asgard and Atlantis that maybe were, it would be pretty easy to all you would have to do is say, well, they're a different faction of the Asgard that were
yeah.
kind of separated and went to a different galaxy and but
Yeah,
that would
have
be
have
cool.
one of them work it like on Atlantis, similar to like when SG1 was working with who was it? It wasn't Thor, it was like the other one that would kind of
Heimdall?
mutter to itself and get kind of irritated.
Oh yeah. It wasn't Heimdall, it was a different one, I think. But I can't remember. But yeah, I know what you mean.
But
Yeah,
like it'd
that
be
was
really
fun.
funny to have like one of them on like Atlantis and stuff and
Totally,
just be like a
totally.
regular like kind of little side character that's always there to help.
I would love that. Like, I actually really like the Asgard, and I thought, I mean, I think it's the deeper you get into it, the more you can explore those kind of characters, and it would have been cool to
Yeah.
explore the Asgard a little deeper.
Yeah, totally, totally. So yeah, so I guess that leaves us with those that have viewed it, hopefully all the way to the end, and are hearing us ask these questions. But I guess, what do you think of Beckett? Beckett as the clone? Would you want Beckett the clone to be there or not? And in terms of any other clone scenarios, whether it's funny or serious, what are ones that you can think of and put in the comments, because we'd love to hear. It's always nice when people comment. I think it's always fun to read people's comments when they do actually reply to our little videos. So
Yeah, we do. We read all the comments and we like to reply to them. So
yeah.
definitely write us comments, and especially like we love silly things, serious things. So anything you can think of.